Peace, everybody. Gonna do this video today, but first I want to talk about the response I got, and I'm still getting for some reason, about the video I did addressing the slander and the propaganda, the vitriol from the Divest Black movement and Cynthia G, whoever she is. I don't even know the lady. Now, when I made the videos, I was intentionally not being subjective, meaning I wasn't really trying to respond about the lady herself. I was being objective. I was basically dealing with the things that were said, because I don't even know the lady, so how can I say anything about it? I only saw 2 videos from her, so I can't really give you a dissertation about her and her personality or whatever. I just talked about how absurd it was to denigrate and to label black men as a whole based on limited false information, without considering all of the things that will, in history, that everybody know, that will disprove your information, as far as so-called black men are weak and they don't defend the black women and all of this. Like, who freed black women from slavery? Who freed the black women from slavery? You could say Lincoln did. Lincoln wasn't intending to free anybody from no slavery. That was a way to get black men to join a union because they was losing. They included freeing the black people from slavery. And black men fought in a war to free black women and children from slavery. Now, these people, these so-called black women, are actually pushing the propaganda that the so-called Caucasian male has nothing to do with the condition of the black people. And a lot of these so-called black women actually separate themselves from the situation that is happening to black men. They say y'all, you, as if they're not so-called part of the so-called black race. Like Sandra Bland wasn't a black woman who actually was murdered by the police in the presence of a black woman police officer who did nothing to help her. But forget that. The topic of this video right here is the black woman is the enemy. Now, when I say the black woman is an enemy, I know it's going to sound negative, like I'm actually indicting the black woman as a whole as being an enemy. But I'm actually coming from a perspective of positivity. Now, an enemy is a person that works against another person's interest. Now, it could be for self-preservation purposes. The person they're working against could be jeopardizing your survival. So in order to protect your survival, you got to take them out. It's tribalism. Or it could be a situation in which you want to exploit and extract these particular people. It could be malicious. You can deem these people as, easy prey and just exploit them, take their land, take their resources for your benefit, to benefit your group. Now, this is what people do all over the world. It could be done within a group, or you got subcategories of groups of people who work against each other because they want the resources or whatever reason, or you just want revenge of the people. Or an enemy could be a person who's not realizing they're working against the interests. But it could be, say for instance, a spy. A person could be sent from another group to spy on this group, because you got intelligence all over the world and you want to know what your enemies are plotting, so they send spies. But if you know this person is a spy, you could feed this person misinformation. When you feed this person misinformation, they go back and they teach this misinformation. It's similar to how a vaccine works. You get this vaccine in there in order to neutralize, the virus by giving it information to destroy itself. But this is what the so-called black woman is. They're given information about reality from another group of people, because the black woman is amongst the Caucasian society for the most part. That's where they work. And they get this information from the people, their groups, the groups they have access to, and from the media. about their own group of people, the so-called black man. The black man is this, the black man is that. The black man is the enemy. So they go back and they teach this to each other. And also, philosophies they learn in these societies. They do drugs, they adopt foreign philosophies such as feminism. And feminism is a fallacy because the name is feminism, right? But the feminists want to be men, which is crazy. See, the feminists are Caucasian women who believe equality with men is being a man. They don't really embrace the whole feminine dynamic, the yin and the yang aspect, or in the Latin aspect, you got words that denote women and words that denote men, masculine, feminine principle. The feminists don't believe in the feminine principle because they believe the feminine principle is subjection. So they thrive to be men. So they taught this to the black women. So the black women come back to the community and teach this to each other. So the girls and the women, they say they could be the man. They don't need the so-called man. They want to be equal to the man. So they actually, this is not the full picture, but I'm just going off the feminist aspect. They say we're going to get the man out the way. The woman going to take that woman and marry that woman, like the degenerate mayor of Chicago is married to a white woman, Lori Lightfoot. And they're going to push the man from that dynamic out the house. You got a lot of situations in which a woman left a man for another woman, you know, because they saw that woman that they left the man for as being a better man for them. Another dynamic as far as the teaching of being a double agent, because they're acting as enemies without knowing they're enemies, because they're the activity, the outcome of it. Because we don't look at, when we do algebra, we do mathematics, we don't look at the things that's being calculated, because some of those numbers that's being calculated are great numbers. 100 in there, you got what, 1,000 in there, but we look at the outcome of the numbers, of the calculations, and that's going to determine what it really was, right? So everything the so-called black women has been doing since the 1970s has led to today, including the black men. Like everything we've been doing led to today. Now, the so-called black women have been informed and led to believe that loyalty is not necessary. Loyalty, devotion, because for the most part, this could be the feminine aspect that the feminist movement don't want to accept, and the masculine aspect. One is dominant, one is recessive, or you can look at it from both ways, because one has something the other one doesn't have. But for the most part, the men are the ones who actually set the philosophy, and they set the standard, and they set the code of behavior. When you see a situation in which a woman had a man and a woman in the house as a mother and a father, they seem to have those qualities more so than the ones that didn't have the male and the female in the house. The loyalty aspect, devotion, being dedicated, that comes from the masculine aspect. And that's why when the man was actually, removed from the black community, even though the men still live in the black community, but it's not a cohesive group. We're separate groups of people. And a man usually just date. They don't get married because women are not trying to be married. So there's just a lot of promiscuity. And this is also what the black women learned from white society, being promiscuous. I'm gonna tell whoever's watching later on my exegesis. But I'm gonna say this though. Now, men are the ones who set the philosophy, the code of ethics, the code of behavior. And we are the ones who actually was the reason that the black community were the biggest church people, because the men was the ones who actually made sure we went to church every Sunday, or we went to the mosque every Sunday. Even to this day, the Nation of Islam do every Sunday, they do a speech. They do the service. And in Jumar Islam, in Orthodox Islam, every Friday, they do Jumar. And a man is the one you know, singing the prayer. Even in the Islamic world, the men are the one who sing the prayer, or the Catholic Church. When the men was kicked out the black community, the churches was self-destructed, because the women, a single mother household, there's no real structure, there's no real order in which you have to do a certain thing every particular day and every Sunday. Like a man's present automatically sets order, and everybody knows what their responsibilities are without even being told. This is just, you know, the dynamic of the masculine dynamic, you know. And the grandfathers are holding the church together because they actually didn't really get infected by the philosophy of the 1970s feminist movement, but they're dying out. But the ones who came after the 1970s, they're not forcing their children to go to church. They're not actually consistent like it used to be. So the churches are dead. The women are just bouncing around following philosophies, because, you know, they follow philosophies. They don't set the philosophies, they follow the philosophies. And the philosophy of these black women that are talking about divest movement, what you will find is the philosophy is led and really created by the Caucasian male. He's behind the scenes leading these black women. Like, whenever you see a black woman doing something as a group, they're being led by some man, and that man is usually like the Wizard of Oz, the wizard behind the curtain, where we saw the wicked witches that the wizard controlled, you know. So the wizard is behind the curtain, and it's the Caucasian male, and he made sure to include in this philosophy nothing to disparage him. He is not to be criticized or blamed for anything, even though the Caucasian male was the one who actually perpetuated slavery, fought to keep slavery, fought against civil rights, even to this very day. You know, the black women got together to get Biden in there, Joe Biden, and he did absolutely no executive orders to assist the so-called black people, especially the black women. So this philosophy that they're spewing against the black men, and I'm going to tell you exactly why this philosophy is necessary. The reason they have a philosophy to separate the so-called black men from the black women, and the reason they're using these so-called black women as double agents to spread the philosophy, is because the only way to conquer a people is to separate the men from the women. Now, in South Africa, this was apartheid. Apartheid wasn't just the separation from the Africans from the Caucasians, right? It also mandated that the South African men and women had to separate from each other. So they, you know, I guess so they can't plan revolution. Now we see this in action, particularly, it happened many other times, but particularly in the 1960s and the 50s, in which the black men and women got together to change the order of America, the racial order, to end segregation, to bring so-called justice and rights into this country. And it was like when you had the civil rights movement, even the Nation of Islam movement, it was always established by women. Like, the women was the foundation. The men were the ones that did the fighting or whatever, went out there, but they did it because they had families, women and children. That was one of the motivation factors in the Nation of Islam, to provide for their women, their wife and their children, right? That motivated the men to get out there and do the work. If you take away the women and children, the man doesn't really have motivation. The man doesn't really have a purpose. You just a dude out there, and you're not really held accountable. You're not really encouraged or ridiculed for not doing that, because the division is almost like, the division now is normalized. In the 1960s or 50s, a black man couldn't really show his face in the black community if he didn't really take care of his family. If he didn't have a family, you know, it wasn't really accepted. Or if he didn't have a belief system. Even the criminals, you know, I'm gonna tell you the reason we still have philosophies in the black community you know, these street philosophies like the Bloods, the Crips. I ain't gonna mention the Chicago thing, but the Bloods and the Crips and the men still continue this is because black men, I would say, are natural philosophers. We are about knowledge and order. So even if you just strip all of the philosophy out, we're going to create a philosophy, and the women, in the feminine aspect of it, they support the philosophy and they support the men in order for it to be successful. And part of being supportive of that is reproducing, you know, taking care of the household. Like when a man is out there working and hunting or fighting, somebody has to protect the house and to make sure that the children are in order. And these things these responsibility has to be shared. But if the women are out there by themselves with children that they have all these different baby daddies with, who's at home taking care of the house? And who's making sure the children don't be destroyed? Who's gonna fulfill that role? What the black woman has been exploiting, they use their grandmothers to take care of the children, to fill the role they supposed to be filling. Why there's no man in there, because they don't really, you know, the promiscuous aspect of the double agent programming. A lot of the black women, the men, they participate in that, but they are seen as just commodities, prostitutes. And the men that they dealing with, they don't really have like a responsibility to them because they just a business transaction. And then when a woman gets pregnant, she can't really identify who the baby daddy is, because like on Maury, the show, you got 20 dudes that she was with that month. So none of these men, even though one of them are the father, or it could be somebody else that's not even in that category, but she can't really identify who the father is. So that child that she has, if she do have the child, will come up at a disadvantage. And that man, if it was a relationship that wasn't based on money and pleasure, then that man would be more obligated to provide for the woman and children, because you know exactly who this dude is, right? But the women who actually come from structured families with a man with a father and a mother there, and there's order and there's responsibilities, those particular women usually have one dude, so they know who the daddy is. Even if they don't get married, she could get child support out the dude. She could get something out the dude. You know, she'll force the dude to, you know, and usually them women who actually come from a structured family will expect what her mother had for the man to, you know, fulfill that role. Because she has the father figure, she knows exactly who to model the man after, and that man is expected to be one day married to the lady. So that's one of the reasons that the so-called Caucasian and brainwashed the black women into spreading the philosophy against the black man was to divide and conquer. And we know the most successful conquest that the Caucasian has ever done was due to dividing and conquering a people from within. When the conquistadors came to Mexico, they used the differences between the Aztecs to their advantage to get them to fight, to instigate those differences. And when Aztecs fought and killed each other, they was weakened, and the conquistadors just destroyed them. And then when you look at Pocahontas, how that Caucasian brainwashed her and got her to go against her own people, end up killing her after he got the intelligence. You got the situation in which the Iroquois were used by the U.S. government to go against the Algonquin Native Americans. A lot of the Native American tribes was killing each other, and the Caucasians came in and picked up the pieces. You know, and then now, even in Spain with the Moors, with King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Castile and Aragon, Ferdinand, he used the nephew of the King of Granada, captured him as a prisoner, and then befriended him and used him to go against Grenada because he had a problem with his uncle. He wanted to see his uncle destroyed, Boabdil. I read this in a book called History of the Moors of Spain. And after Boabdil helped Ferdinand destroy his uncle and allowed them to conquer the last stronghold in the Moorish Spain, he realized he was a fool. And he tried to hold on to power, and then Ferdinand and them starved him to death. And he had to surrender, and they let him go after they got Grenada and defeated the last Moorish stronghold, which they would have never defeated without Boabdil. It was too fortified, but he had all the plans, everything. It's like this Judas and the Black Messiah, you know. You got to get an enemy to help because they couldn't really infiltrate. They didn't know they needed some intelligence, so they sent a person in there to help them. And this is what they did with the black woman. She is a agent, a double agent used to feed false information to convince the black woman to accept an unnatural position. For one, they want the black woman to be a feminist, which means to be a man. For two, they want the black women to separate themselves, because there's only two people in the black race, men and women. You got children, you got elderly people, you know, but they all are different categories of men and women, older, younger, and in the present. But they want to say it's just men over there and just women, and they want to forget or ignore the role that non-black people had in our demise and having our demise. They want to give all the blame to the so-called black men, and they don't really, the so-called black women don't really acknowledge the positive aspects of the so-called black man. They only look at the negative aspects, and a lot of the negative aspects are false. You know, they don't really honor their own men. They don't really honor their own family. I don't know what they're just in a state of confusion, and they don't realize that they are actually necessary for, like, if the black women wouldn't have joined the feminist movement, if they would have stayed with the Black Panthers, if they would have stayed in the black church, if they would have stayed in the Nation of Islam, we would have probably overthrew America or had our own nation by now. But the Caucasian men, like they wrote in the Willie Lynch letter, you know, this is their biggest asset. Even if when they go to like other countries, they say they want to empower the women, like in the Islamic world. Really, they want to divide the women from the men. When they divide the women from the men become weakened. He become weakened. He loses his women and the children. So he's isolated by himself. The women and children are isolated. The white man come through, kill him, and then take over the man's family, and then teach the children a false doctrine. And this is written in a book I read. I know I read a lot. I allegedly read a lot of books, but this book called The Prince by Machiavelli, when he talked about how to conquer France, he said France is so old. The only way to conquer France is to kill up the whole royal family, to kill all the nobles loyal to the royal family, and then you got to erase the history and teach the people that you always ruled, right? Now, this is exactly what they're doing right now. Killing off all the nobles in the black community, the rulers, the Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, you know, killed all the ones loyal to them, Black Panthers, Fred Hampton, the black man, and then reteach the people a history. Because the black people don't really know the history of the country. We don't even know we don't know nothing about the Mississippian people. We don't know nothing about the Algonquin people, the Carthaginians. There's nobody on earth calling themselves Moors or Carthaginians, Phoenicians. You see what I'm saying? You got Libya, Lebanon, you got Morocco, but they're not calling themselves Carthaginians. So it is not accepted that the Carthaginians are extinct. It's just not talked about. It's ignored. So we assume the Carthaginians are extinct, or all the French nobles was killed. There's no more members of the royal family or the nobility. We just assume they don't exist. But what if they do exist? How would you know? We are dependent solely on the conquerors and the oppressors for our information about our own selves. We don't have an independent council to determine what really happened. We don't really consider the perspectives of alternative groups of people who coexisted or simultaneously existed, who witnessed what happened. Like, for instance, in the United States, we had Native Americans who was here. They witnessed what happened, but we never we never asked them what happened. We just listened to what the so-called Caucasian telling us as far as what happened during slavery. We never asked the Africans what happened during slavery. We just tell them, how we gonna tell the so-called Africans what happened? And allegedly, we came from, they the ones who allegedly sold us. So obviously they should have some information to give us as far as what happened, what really happened. And some of them actually say it didn't happen. You see what I'm saying? So the so-called black, so we have to really question the information that we're getting from these Caucasians, especially since it is obviously common knowledge that the Caucasian was the ones who did the damage. But for some reason, the so-called black women in America do not even acknowledge that. They just blaming the so-called black men for all the problems. Like, y'all should have protected us. You don't even know what happened. Like, literally 100 years ago, we could have literally had our own kingdom in America and never been enslaved. We don't know what, all we know is what the so-called Caucasian is telling us. And we never question it. And you blaming us about something that somebody told you happened without even verifying, cross-referencing if that actually happened or not. And you're actually judging and condemning. Like, so for instance, nobody never criticized and condemned the Jewish men, the so-called Jewish men, for allowing their people to be put in concentration camps and exterminated. They're never called weak. They're never called cowards. Nobody never say they don't defend their women and children. Even though it's historical fact that actually so-called Jewish men participated in killing their own women and children in the whole so-called Holocaust. Nobody calls them weak and non-protectors. They always get the sympathy, especially from the so-called black women, because the philosophy that the so-called black women is teaching each other is a false philosophy given to them by the Caucasian. And the black men, our philosophy is not even considered. We're not even, as a group, because you have, like, you know, people that have families, you know, satellite, small individual, but as a group, we're not a community of families. We're not expected to get married. Like, women do not, like, they don't really look for a black man to marry them. You got more non-so-called black women that ask the black man to marry them. Like, literally. Like, allegedly, the man's supposed to ask the woman to marry them. But a lot of these women be asking the black man to marry them, and the dude just say, yeah, you know. That's how they be ending up with these white women, because the white women ask them to marry them. But yeah, I'm just, that's about it. I gotta go. It's a video. The black woman is the enemy, and that's a perspective. Thank you.